Hello there, and welcome to this damn full idealistic crusade. This is the motion picture analyst, and once again, I'm going to try my hand at doing a solo audio commentary track. And again, please do keep in mind these are entirely off the cuff, and my brain is going, 10,000 different ways at once. So I will do my best to do a running commentary of various thoughts that run through my head, which usually do anyway whenever I watch these films, and various notes about production, my own personal insight into character and certain sequences, and just in general the films overall. So I figured I might as well start doing commentary tracks for my life's obsession, which is the James Bond film series. So, of course, that means starting all the way back at the very beginning of the Eon series with 1962's Dr. No. I decided to try my hand at this, and again, because my head is filled with so much random Bond knowledge and Bond trivia, in addition to, a pretty detailed knowledge of Fleming's original works, I figured it would be an interesting challenge to try and do a Bond commentary and see if it was anything other than me babbling incoherently for 2 hours. With that being said, hopefully you can enjoy this and sync it up to your own copies of the film. And again, this is a very loose and informal commentary. I'll try not to trip over myself too much in doing this, but I must say that I'm really trying to prepare myself because with Bond and my Bond knowledge and Bond fandom, it's very difficult to always get everything into a coherent line of discussion. So again, this is a very loose, very informal commentary track, like I did with the Batman films. So I just figured I'd try my hand at doing another one, and might as well go for the big one. So with that being said, go ahead and grab whatever version of the film you would like to watch along with. And this is a rough sync. It's not not intended to be absolutely perfect, because again, this is not a professionally recorded commentary track by any means. Gather your copy of the film and cue it to the 0.00 mark. And also be sure to have the original mono audio track selected if you're looking at one of the later releases, because the remixes for these films, particularly the early films, really does the genius of the original audio design a disservice, because these films, again, particularly the early films, have very meticulously designed audio tracks, and you always want to listen to the Bond films with their original audio. So definitely select that if you're watching on some of the later DVDs and Blu-rays, if that's an option, because I do really think it makes a difference, and I really can't stand the remixes, if I'm honest. Anyway, once you've done that on whatever version of the film you wish, cue it up to the 0 mark, and I will do just a sort of loose count-in, so we can get going. So get your copies there, and in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, press play now. And here we have the computer bleeps and the first appearance of the iconic Maurice Binder gun barrel. I always love how it pauses very dramatically to give the Albert and Harry presentation. And here we have the first gun barrel with that beautiful little blast of silence there over the gunshot and the blood starting to come down. And then the theme jumps right in. Of course, that is Bob Simmons there, the legendary stuntman and stunt coordinator for the Bond series, who is in all 3 of the first gun barrels instead of Sean Connery, who didn't do it until it was reshot for Scope and Thunderball. This is the first Binder title sequence, which uses a really interesting, flashing, almost flashbulb style title sequence with all of these flashing logos and obviously circles and squares and all kinds of shapes and things. Of course, title sequences being a special thing, it was still sort of a novelty at the time in the 1960s. And this shows already how much of a genius Binder was at not just visuals, but also cutting the title sequences to the actual music that is being used, something he would perfect with the iconic title sequences to come in the title songs. But you can see it already with the theme here, because he's jumping all around, which was something that really irked Monty Norman, the composer of the film, at first. I also love that already he's doing certain almost freezes on key production personnel to give their own sort of signature credit, which he would also do again and refine throughout his credits for the rest of the series. And here we see, interestingly, to a sort of calypso-themed bunch of silhouetted dancers, which not only presages the iconic naked women silhouettes in the later titles, but gets you set up for the island Jamaican feel and the various calypsos that will be throughout the soundtrack and background music. And again, bright colors keeping the notion that, this is something new and different, and it is vibrant. Of course, this is getting away primarily from the tradition of kitchen sink dramas that had come to prominence in Britain. And then here's the really brilliant little touch where they have the three blind mice we'll see in the film on sort of a treadmill of sorts with some back projection going there. And we use this to transition into the opening of the film. And here we have coming up the most important words in the credit sequence, which is directed by Terence Young. Terence Young, it cannot be understated his importance to these films. Without Terence Young, we wouldn't have a film series. It wouldn't have its soul. And you get that in Dr. No at its most naked. Because this is the first film, we don't have the iconography of the series. We don't have all of the formula is not there yet. And if it had been anybody else other than Terence Young, we wouldn't have gotten that as it developed. And what's really so interesting about Dr. No is it follows Fleming's novel quite closely, or at least as far as they could with the censor boards of 1962. But it's already making slight deviations. It's already condensing things down and giving it this energy and drive that is really the Bond signature and what is the magic of the series and what makes these films work. And that's Terence Young primarily. But the film was offered to other directors. Guy Hamilton almost directed Dr. No, and one often thinks what it would have been like had Dr. No been directed by Guy Hamilton instead of Dr. No, and instead of Terence Young. It would have set the series off in a completely different direction. So here we have The Killing of Strangways, which is, of course, the opening of Fleming's novel as well. It's, of course, shown here in full, and we don't really get the whole mystery aspect that goes throughout the novel. Here's a little fun bit where you see the camera crew reflected there and the lights there for a brief second in the car. And it's little things like that. And I always loved how this sequence is silent until she switches on the radio and you have this nice ground hum that gives it this weird sort of vibe. But again, the rough patches, the low budget of this film gives it such an interesting quality. It's, of course, also a time capsule in sorts because this is shot in Jamaica, as is where the novel is set, of course. But it's also right after the British rule period had ended, and so you sort of have this weird transitional period of the British colonialism still kind of being there, even though Jamaica had become independent. Now, of course, here we have The Killing of Strangway's secretary, and here's a little jump cut. That's a Peter Hunt move to get the crash of the glass sort of synced up and matching the tempo of the blast of the silenced pistol. Also cool that you see silenced pistols in this film, which was not really a common thing in 1962. And I've always loved this transition he came up with, where the music builds and Hunt cuts to just the throwing down of the folders, ending with Crab Key and then Dr. No, and we hit right over to the transition back to London. So it's very dramatic. And you get this sort of little breather here, but already it's kind of giving you this twinge of suspense. Now, when you look at this and the camera comes in to the radio reception room of British intelligence, it's bringing you into the world that's being created. And it's also really cool. You can see that, the hairstyles and the costumes and everything, it sort of has a 50s vibe to it because it is 1962. So it's not quite the full 60s that we think of when we think of the early Bond films. And you see how business professional they are and everything. But again, this is all establishing the world of Bond and MI6 and British intelligence. And it's letting you know off the bat that, yes, this is all very serious, but it's another world. It's not your everyday realm. And, of course, we're building up to the reveal of Bond, which we get just after this. So, again, it's giving a nice delay and building up the character. Of course, the audience doesn't know yet at this point in time. I have to go ahead and point out here how astonishing the set design is by Ken Adam in this film, especially when you consider the fact the budget of this film is 1 million pounds, not even dollars, and his set design budget was about 14,500 pounds. It is amazing what he does with this. Already, we're recreating Les Ambassadeurs on a stage. I mean, this is just astonishing. I also have to talk about Ted Moore's photography, which sets the template and the standard and is the definitive look and feel of a Bond film to this day, and really has never been equaled. And here we have the pullback, and we see our first true glimpse of Bond. And again, everything's held just so much to build that anticipation a little longer, build the suaveness, build the coolness, that all-important cool factor. Terence Young admitted he lifted this idea from a reveal of Paul Muni, I believe in the film Juarez, but he builds it up even further with Peter Hunt assisting, and they developed, honestly, the most revolutionary editing style I think the cinema had ever seen by this point. But here, they had to toy with it just enough to get it just right. So James Bond is right there with the lighting of the cigarette. And if you look very closely, the Connery is holding the cigarette in different places. It doesn't quite match up, but the way that Peter Hunt cuts in and around, it avoids making continuity errors, and it just establishes this astonishingly amazing flow of images that little things like that, they're totally inconsequential. And you're watching this guy, you're hanging on every single last thing he's doing, and he's literally the most cool thing you've ever seen in all of humanity. Of course, the irony is Connery himself was none of this, and had to really, really, really be taken around by Terence Young, who knew all of the accoutrements of Bond because he had a very similar background, both in military intelligence and in the war, and a sort of cynicism about life in general that was very Bondian. And so, you want to talk about directors injecting themselves into a film. Well, there's Terence is all over his Bond films and in the soul of the series. You can't get away from that. But he recognized something that was already there in Connery. Everybody talks about that, Terence Young took him under his wing, and he took him to his tailor and everything, and helped him realize how to play Bond, how to feel comfortable in the clothes, under the skin, which is true. But I think he recognized that was already there in Connery because you see it in his earlier performances. And he had directed him in a smaller part in a film called Action of the Tiger, which is a great little film for MGM from 1957. And, of course, Peter Hunt always working in the James Bond theme where he could, which gives that nice edge and reminds the audiences of the theme which they could buy, on a 7-inch when they left. This is the first of the Moneypenny scenes. First time we see Lois Maxwell, who looks stunning, and the interplay between Bond and Moneypenny here is set up and allowed to play out, which different directors and different scripts later on handled this differently, but you can't ever get away from the classical style established here. They already, we've pushed in on Bond and Moneypenny here. They're in an intimate sort of pose, and you can see the delight in their eyes as they do the repartee, and we're being presented with the problem now for the first time. There's a sort of bemused fatalism there, which you only really get in the three Terence Young films. Again, talking about the Ken Adam sets, here, all of this wood is false. It was all done up. And so in Dr. No from Russia with Love, M's office, which we get reused for various films, none of this is real wood. It's all fake. Not even the leather on the doors is real because they had no money. And ironically, the way this is shot, not just because it's the first one, the first M briefing scene, I think this is probably the best M briefing scene in the whole series. The photography, the lighting, the staging, the look of the office is stunning. And to me, even though none of this is real wood, it actually looks more impressive. And you don't even consider that not being real and being a set. And of course, they had the benefit of it being the first go-round, but there's just something about it. And there's an energy to it, and Bond's being presented with the problem. Here we have Bernard Lee's first appearance as M. And talk about pitch-perfect casting. He literally embodies every single aspect of the character that Fleming wrote on the page, and you can't picture anybody else in the role ever. So everyone who has come since has had enormous shoes to fill. And here you do have that sort of paternal role that M has over Bond in the original Fleming texts. It's never explicitly stated. Of course, we don't get Bond's internal monologue that we do in the novels, but you do get it there. And you get it especially, in the opening line, it happens to be 3 a.m. When do you sleep, 007? And we get it underlined with the presentation of the Walther PPK. This is straight from Fleming's novel, which takes place after From Russia with Love, and it's referenced that Bond's Beretta got jammed, which is why he was poisoned and almost killed by Rosa Klebb at the end of the novel, because the films are done completely out of order. This is about some other case we aren't privy to. Here we have the first appearance of Major Boothroyd, of course Q, but not played by Desmond Llewellyn. This was the original actor, Peter Burton, and I must admit I memorized his dialogue about the PPK when I was a kid. And of course, all of this came about because the real Geoffrey Boothroyd, who was a firearms expert and a great fan of Fleming's novels, felt it was ridiculous that Bond was using a Beretta 25 because it was such a tiny pistol. And so he wrote Fleming a bunch of suggestions about better weapons to use, and Fleming corresponded with him, met with him, and sort of settled on the Walther PPK 7.65 mil as the all-around best choice for Bond, which makes perfect sense. Better caliber, designed for plainclothes police in Germany, very easy to use, reload, hide under a suit jacket. Of course, Connery in his iconic beige and blue holster, which I think every kid who sees Dr. No literally wants one. And of course, there are no gadgets in the film, so this is sort of the first Q presentation of a gadget of sorts. Of course, on the novel, Bond was also given a heavier Smith & Wesson caliber revolver for, heavier duty work. Of course, that's eliminated from the film. And here is the ultimate chiding of Bond as the rebellious child, where he's tried to sneak out the Beretta anyway and take it with him. This, of course, invented another flourish for the film because Terence Young was very adamant that they had to insert a sort of humor here in the story throughout to make it play well with audiences, get things past censors, and make the violence and the sex much more palatable. And not to give it a jokey flavor, but the slight tinge of tongue in the cheek, the sardonic quality, that's what you have in the three Terence Young films, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Thunderball. Here we cut to Bond's apartment, which is the first time, and until Live and Let Die, the only time we see Bond's apartment. And Ken Adam has done a really interesting thing by giving it a very, very sort of calm, but yet not quite empty. But it shows that Bond himself, it's his home. There are some creature comforts, but it's not fully stocked with them because he is always on the go and always has the cavalier attitude towards life. So here Sylvia Trench reappears, and we get this great little build-up. Of course, as Young put it originally, Trench was supposed to be naked here, but you couldn't do that in 1962. Sylvia Trench was supposed to be another recurring character, here played by Eunice Gayson, and when Terence Young didn't come back for Goldfinger, it's understood that they just didn't put her into the script. The idea was she was supposed to be the lover in the first reel who appears and always gets thwarted because Bond will get called away, and it was sort of supposed to be a running gag like the office back and forth with Moneypenny. Now, when you look at all of the love scenes in the Young films, there's a certain sensual quality to them that I don't find anywhere else in the series. Bond is known as the great international lover and the great figure of machismo, but all of the love scenes, and you see it right here in Dr. No, they have a certain sensual quality to them that just smolders on the screen, and I think that is something exclusive to the Terrence Young 3. It's never quite the same in Goldfinger or any of the other films. I think it's something unique to the Terrence Young films. It doesn't get talked about really as much as the more obvious hard focus on realism and espionage and being a two-fisted film. But here Bond enters Jamaica. We get the first appearance of the opposition with Margaret LaWars playing the Little Miss Freelance photographer girl. I always love the touch where she licks the light bulb, the flash bulb, which was something they cooked up on set. There's a lot of that in this film. Terrence Young would say in interviews and the commentary tracks that, they cooked up all kinds of business, as he put it. And they had that luxury by being on location, having a lot of location problems, having to shoot around things, and having no money. So, again, it is the rough blueprint for the series. It doesn't have the formula established. There are some quirky things, and it is, again, a time capsule for 1962 Jamaica, but it's amazing how much is there. This, I think, is one of the key moments of Connery's performance. Here he's observing, he's calling Government House, finding out that Mr. Jones is a plant, obviously, and he watches, he holds the phone away and he looks at the photographer going over to the car and sort of interacting with Jones. And this leads to, his inquiry, oh, you didn't send a car for me. Okay. And then by the way. Now, when he says, forgive me if I'm a few minutes late, it's the look in Connery's eyes here when he hangs up the receiver. You know that Mr. Jones is not long for this world. I mean, that's the quality there. It's got a tinge of sardonic humor, but it's also purely vicious. And that's the particular Connery charm that people pick up on, and it's something that Terrence Young helped bring out. And again, I think if it had been anybody else directing Dr. No, everything would be different. Jack Lord is here as the first Felix Leiter on screen, and he's introduced as a shadowy figure trailing Bond, so you don't know his character yet, you don't know his allegiance. Here in the car, he's already with Quarrel, who, of course, will be established later on as Bond's ally. But, newcomers to the film are left wondering what's going on, so it's setting up a nice bit of suspense, which is continued here with Jones speeding away from, obviously, someone following them, which, of course, is just Felix and Quarrel. And already the sound design here, it's uncommon for any other film of this vintage. It's obviously location photography, but the way that the on-set audio is used, the open road, the sound of the car engines, and then it ramps up here. It's sort of diffused in a way, but it's a particular moment that's always stuck with me. And each car has its own particular sound to its engine, which is something that would actually pop up again in the famous Bullitt car chase, if you look at that film's sound design. And Peter Hunt encouraged the sound men at Pinewood to punch up the levels of the sound, so he had a hand in the sound design as well as the editing. And Norman Wanstall was the sound effects man who really went far and beyond in recording new sounds and helping build this really interesting soundtrack. And of course, Bond is in the fedora that is iconic to the early films, which it's kind of sad that we lost that. But of course, men's hats went out of fashion very quickly after the mid-1960s. Connery's eyes are as hard as steel here, and you know that again. Poor Mr. Jones here is in over his head. Monty Norman's score, while very, again, islandy feeling, it does really work in the key sequences, and it's got a nice building effect. By this point, Bond just tosses him out of the car, and I love when he puts the gun away and takes his handkerchief out, because it's like this guy is not even really a threat. You have the first real appearance of the Bob Simmons staged fight sequences, which are just incredible. And here we have one of the best Peter Hunt editing fixes, where Bond pulls back with his right and punches him with his left. Total continuity gaffe, but Peter Hunt makes it literally one of the most viciously felt punches in the history of cinema. And it doesn't matter at all that it's the wrong fist. So there's a lot of little fixes and things he would come up with. that are just astonishing. You don't notice them at all until you're really looking for them, or you read about them, or you hear the recollections in the extras and commentaries. It's really interesting that Jones commits suicide by cyanide. That's, again, not something you really got in films of this genre by this point. It does give a nice grounding to the scene. So here we have really the first of the major remembered quotable one-liners that was cooked up by both Connery and Terrence Young. And, of course, it gives a nice breather to the previous scene and gets us into the government house sequence without being bored, because this is a dialogue scene where we're going to go back and forth and meet the people inside government house, hear about the various figures who were the last ones to see Strangways. And this goes into the fact that Dr. No essentially is a detective story. And it's great that they chose this for the first film, because being more of a detective story, we're following Bond, we're with Bond the whole narrative, we're able to see his character, and there's not a lot of cutaways, there's not a lot of other stuff going on. Bond is our through line through the narrative, and that makes us know him better. We come to like him very quickly. He's extremely intelligent, and again, Connery's performance, being as amazing as it is so vital to the film's effectiveness, because if you had somebody who was merely okay, it wouldn't work at all the same way, because Bond is our key figure. And in a lot of ways, later films kind of moved away from that. They didn't always stick there for a long time. If you look very far in the distance there, you see three figures walking by there. That was actually just found recently on certain Bond forums. It's pointed out that it seems like those are the three blind mice, and so maybe it's part of a deleted scene or subplot where they actually looked and observed Bond going into Strangways' house. That's one of those little tiny details you almost never notice. So like how Bond gets to go there and actually investigate Strangways' office, and you see that he's able to probe through and see things that were not noticed by the police after searching. So again, it shows up him finding the receipt for Dent Laboratories here, that he is an intelligence man, a great investigative mind, and again, smarter than the average character in the film. So it takes an operative of his standing to do that. Here's a little jump cut here, which you don't quite notice at first. It's a weird little jump, and at first I thought it was because maybe the film got damaged or something and Hunt had to cut around it, but I think it was just him trying to cut to the chase. He does that a few times in Dr. No, especially in the opening where the secretary gets shot, and it's just to get the film moving that much quicker. And there is something to the runtime of the film being 1 hour, 51 minutes. It's the, tied with Goldfinger as being the shortest film in the series. And the magic of a Bond film, it really has to do with that 2-hour runtime. If you can get right around 2 hours, especially a little bit under, and you get that rhythm, that charge to the narrative that really is unique to the Peter Hunt editing style. And once he left the series, it made an absolute an absolute change in the style of the Bond series from then on. But the Bond films that are 2 hours and under, 2 hours 1 minute, 2 hours 2 hours under, there is something to that. You establish a rhythm, you keep to that, and you get the audience out at 2 hours and under, instead of going on for 2 hours 10, 2 hours 15, 2 hours 20 minutes. It's interesting to note that, Dr. No and Goldfinger are the shortest films. For Russia with Love is only 4 minutes longer at 1 hour and 55 minutes. Here we have Bond setting his traps for would-be searchers, and something you get right from the Fleming novels. Also like that we get to see him, suiting up, as it were, putting the PPK on holster on, and then putting on the jacket and smoothing it out, making sure the gun doesn't bulge out too much. Passages like that from Fleming were, right out of reality, and something I've always enjoyed because they're so vivid, and it's one of the only times you get something like that in any of the films. Now we've cut back to the various characters we saw at the opening from the Bridge Four. Here we have Anthony Dawson as Professor Dent, who was a great friend of Terrence Young's, who Young did cast a lot of people that he knew or had worked with before, and you actually see Dawson come back. They brought him back for the unseen Blofeld and From Russia with Love and Thunderball. Of course, the voice was dubbed by Eric Pullman. Again, the look here that Ted Moore achieves, primarily it's a British film, so you are dealing with the 1:6:6 aspect ratio. It was shown 1:8:5 in the US and probably a lot of other places, but the 1:6:6 ratio really suits the first three films very well. They were shot spherical, whereas the rest of the films, excepting the first two of the Roger Moore era, were all shot in scope 235 Panavision. And there's a certain intimacy from the spherical Bonds that I've always really appreciated. And while Bonds are known for being great travelogues and being scope and having wide panoramas, and Ted Moore was amazing at doing scope photography as well, they did, I think, kind of lose something when they went to scope. And so that's a certain quality I love about the 5 films in the original series that were spherical films. It also means that when you see Dr. No, on the old video releases, or you saw it on TV back in the day, and the 1:3:3 aspect ratio, it opens up on the top and bottom, and you just lose a little on the side. So it's not quite as bad as a pan and scan job on, say, Thunderball, for example. Here we have the introduction of John Kitzmiller as Quirrell, who is a brilliant embodiment of Fleming's character. But here, of course, Bond and Quirrell are meeting for the first time, whereas in the novels they met first in the second book, Live and Let Die. And so Quirrell came back as a recurring character in the Dr. No novel. I love the moment here where Bond gets to think and reflect. And again, the early films took the time to build a certain realism and to allow little moments of breathing room. We have this nice leisurely walk where Bond sort of trails Quirrell over to Pussfellers, and you know that something is going on, but you don't quite know what exactly, because you don't know the character's motivations yet or their real allegiances. So that also adds to the fact that, again, Dr. No it's a suspense thriller, but it has the elements of being a detective film or being a mystery. So it's slowly unfolded over time. And I think the real effectiveness comes when Dr. No himself as a character is built up over the course of the entire film. So his final reveal has a lot of potency to it, which is something that gets built up even further and improved in From Russia with Love, the next film, which essentially builds. The whole film builds to the Orient Express confrontation with Bond and Red Grant, and you can recognize the similar theme in both films. Also, here you can see the nice boldness of the color in the film. Again, it's to be noted that the Bond films were coming out in Britain, and they were seen as being an escape from not just the post-war period, but the British kitchen sink realism dramas and grainy black and white and all about dour, realistic situations. This is a lovely scene here. You see the door opening slightly in the back rear. The whole of the frame is being used. I love the slatted roof as well. And this nice little fight here where Bond is able to throw Pussfeller and Quirrell into the stack of red stripe boxes. It's got a nice dynamic feel to it. And again, the dynamic is right there in the image with the slight tilt to the camera, getting the roof in the shot as well. And we have the similar moment of the gun reveal pointing in someone's back and then the camera pulling back like we saw with Bond and Mr. Jones in the car. So now Felix has come in, and the way that we're introduced to him being of the CIA, he's got a Walther as well. He's dressed similarly to Bond, and but this is the sort of meet cute where they finally meet on screen. Jack Lord plays Felix so well. It's a shame he didn't come back and do more films, and I know I'm not alone in saying that. But, apparently he wanted, co-billing and a much bigger salary. And so Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, the producers, were like, no, we're going to get somebody else. And that sort of led to the revolving door of Felix Leiters popping up throughout the series from this point onward. This was a real location. The man playing Pussfeller actually owned this nightclub restaurant. And again, A lot of the stuff in Jamaica is all real locations because they didn't have the money for anything else. And here we have Byron Lee and the Dragonaires, who became a extremely important band in Jamaica and the Caribbean, and they contribute several songs to the Dr. No score. Unfortunately, the Dr. No soundtrack just has some various calypsos and the James Bond theme, but Monty Norman's actual score has never been officially released. It's one of 2 Bond scores that have never been released in their film recorded form, the other being The Spy Who Loved Me. So while the soundtrack album is a fun listen, it's still not the score from the film, which it'd be cool to have someday. So here we have the setting up of the problem, where we are first introduced to Bond is introduced to the notion of Dr. No and Crab Key, and it's dealt out in a very nice conversational manner, but with a nice dark tinge to it, because this is still a serious, straightforward, adventure story. It's also nice that Quarrel is here with Bond and Felix and is an equal partner in this particular quest, just as he was with Strangways before. He's not just the boatman or the local guy. And here in the background, we have Little Miss Freelance reappearing again, and Bond recognizing, her as, coming back and having a camera again and taking a photograph again, means that she is obviously up to something and an enemy operative of sorts. This is directly from the novel, of course, but I've just always loved the way this whole sequence is staged. We go out a little bit for Quarrel to capture her. Felix gets up and moves over, so the Freelance and Quarrel are there in the center. But the way that Bond handles this, the coolness that Connery has here, why do you want another picture of me? And he doesn't even really look at her. He just looks at the camera. He slowly pulls the flashbulb back. It's very impressive, and you can see on screen in the reaction shots that Felix is totally impressed and bemused by the way that Bond handles this with such skill and drive and a relentless charm, a particular way, a style, all of his own. And that's the secret of the early films. It's not, okay, Bond must do ABC. It's in the how he does it. Freelance, for whom, has a certain darkness and charm, and here she does the really dangerous thing. She cuts Quarrel with a flashbulb on the face, and I always love how red the blood is on his hand when John Kitzmiller pulls his hand down. And the sardonic humor comes back here, with second time nothing's turned up. You can see there, again, Felix is bemused. And that sets up, that, Bond, goes on to say, what was this arm being broken? Another take cyanide. Who puts that sort of scare into people? It sets up the danger of, who's ultimately revealed to be Dr. No. And the importance of this scene is this is the point where we narrow everything down, all the choices. Okay, so where's the weird place? Okay, there's this weird place called Crab Key, and it's run by this weird guy called Dr. No, and he's totally, that's the red flag for Bond. Whereas, of course, in the novel, we have the whole subplot about it being the island of the roseate spoonbills and the bird guano factory run by Dr. No and the mysterious deaths and things. So that's kind of brought over into this, but all the stuff about the birds and the guano factory is removed. In terms of the writing, there's a number of credited writers on the film, but you have Berkeley Mather and Johanna Harwood, and Wolf Mankiewicz wrote on the film but didn't want credit because he didn't think the film was going to turn out very well. But the key was bringing in Richard Maybaum, who had worked with Cubby Broccoli before and Terrence Young and Ted Moore and most of the key production crew brought into Dr. No on the Warwick films of the 1950s. And so it was Cubby Broccoli's idea to bring all the key members that he'd worked with to be on the Bond series. This is a little additional scene where the three blind mice are going to try and kill Bond, weirdly with a silenced pistol from across the street, which realistically probably wouldn't work very well. Peter Hunt talked about how he had to fix this by adding the flash. The car goes by, but he didn't have anything to cut to, so he optically flashed the negative there in the editing lab to make the scene work better. And it's always funny how disappointed they are. It's like, oh, we missed. We couldn't kill him. We're so sad. Something minor here that's much bigger in the novel. If you look, the secretary here is of Asian origin. The notion of Asian ethnic characters in the novel being in certain places is a giveaway to Bond eventually that they are obviously in league or operatives of Dr. No. It's a very minor thing. You kind of blink it and you miss it, but when you notice, his secretary is like that, and of course Miss Taro later on being the secretary at Government House, basically gives Dr. No an ear or an eye, or sorry, eyes and ears into everything that's going on the entire island. This is a very small scene, but it's very, very important for a number of reasons. Again, if you look at the set design, it's amazing what Ken Adam does with this. It's very modern, but it's also it's a mixture of very modern, almost high-tech looking in ways, and then what seemingly is like traditional island decor with the slats on the windows and the sunlight coming in. The way that Bond handles this with Dent, he's manipulating everything, but then when he turns around and he takes the receipt back, because Dent was going to obviously destroy the evidence, but Bond is too quick for him, and then exits nonchalantly. Which sets up this scene here where Dent runs away to Dr. No because he's terrified. Bond has found out those samples came back from Crab Key, so I ran here to tell you. You can literally tell he does have a genuine anxiety here, where he looks over his shoulder and everything, and this is all set up from that tiny little scene where Bond obviously knows more than he's letting on, and he's gone to Professor Dent's office, and without saying anything, he's not so gently, it's like, I know something's up here, and he's reading Dent's reactions, which Dent's reactions tell him more than anything. This is the first view of Dr. No's bauxite mine. Of course, this is obviously a miniature mixed in with real footage, and it's a change from the novel. The novel, of course, Dr. No ran a guano factory. Of course, this is obviously much better smelling and not quite as visually unappealing as mountains of guano. But the way Fleming described the guano factory and Dr. No's eventual demise never quite leaves the reader's imagination. The way these shots are kind of held, it builds up the tension because, Dent is going into something larger than himself. I've always loved the clanging of his feet on the metal, which Peter Hunt and Norman Wanstall talk about. They put in there. And then that immediately cuts out when the door opens, and it's so ominous. If you look there on the right, hidden there, it's Milton Reed, who pops up at the dinner table scene, starts beating up Bond, and would later, he appeared in many British films, but you later see him play Sandor in The Spy Who Loved Me. This is the famous set that Ken Adam had to build once he ran out of money. He built this and had no money, so he said this cost about £450, and he came up with the idea of having the big speaker grill in the ceiling and making it very expressionistic with the angles and a forced perspective. That's the reason why the camera is at one angle and only moves in and moves out, because obviously if you move the camera anywhere else, you didn't have anything and it wouldn't work because it's a forced perspective. But it is astonishing. And again, he did this for literally nothing because he had already blown through his budget. And Terrence Young said, he thought this was the best work Ken Adam ever did. And I find it hard to disagree, even though his legendary work on Barry Lyndon and the You Only Live Twice volcano set and The Spy Who Loved Me supertanker set, this film is so intricately designed, and I have no idea how he did it for the tiny fraction of budget that he had. So, his creativity knew no bounds and was a key factor in establishing the Bond image. Even though he obviously didn't do all of the films, it's a particular style and image. For me in particular, and Dr. No, the thing I've always taken most is the copper-plated doors in Dr. No's Fortress. I've always wanted one of those in my own house, actually, still do. I love the way those look. So we're introduced to the tarantula, which takes the place of the centipede from Fleming's novel. Of course, anything about tarantulas, they are not poisonous like the centipedes are, so you have to wonder what the whole point of this is. Audiences at the time probably were not aware that a tarantula bite would kill a normal man. And I have to wonder if they were maybe influenced by Hammer's Hound of the Baskervilles from 1959, which had a tarantula in it as well. That was a nice Peter Hunt transitional edit there. We go from the spine-tingling creepiness of Dent walking out with the spider and the Monty Norman music, hard cut to Bond walking into the elegant hotel lobby with the Bond theme. And here we have the nice touch of the desk clerk looking hungrily after Bond, which gets repeated in the Thunderball Nassau Hotel, although it's not as well glimpsed. And again, that, I think, goes back to the notion of that certain sensual quality that's only found in the Terrence Young 3 Bonds. And again, it may be me talking out of my head. It's just a pet theory of mine and something it always pops back up. Here, Bond sees the hair is gone, and you'll see that the fingerprints are smudged all over the briefcase, which means that his room has been searched and not very well. So, obviously there is opposition around, but you can see he's sort of bemused because, they left obvious traces everywhere. In the novel, there's some a basket of fruit that's poisoned. Here you see Bond take a sniff at the open Smirnoff bottle and then open another one. I've always felt maybe that was a nod to that. I don't know if they put anything in it. I don't even know if that's just me, but I've always felt that maybe that was a nod to the poisoned fruit of the novel, that Bond decides to open the fresh bottle just to make sure. And of course, it's very hot in Jamaica, so you see him put the glass against his head because he's on fire. It's a nice little touch. It's just, again, a blink and you miss it thing. Here it goes quiet, and we hear the gentle sounds of the exterior, which is something you actually hear very lightly in all of the house and hotel room scenes in Dr. No, which is something you didn't always get in films of this era. Bond feels the first prickling of something strange. You see the fear come up on his face. Again, when you read the passage in the novel with the tropical deadly centipede, it's horrendous, and never read it before you go to bed like I did the first time I read the book as a kid. All the shots of the spider are on a physical body is actually Bob Simmons. They were inserts done. Connery was photographed strapped to the bed, and they put a plate of glass, which you can tell by the tarantula legs sort of sticking straight. Connery is terrified because, of course, he was apparently terrified of spiders in general. But they had to strap him to a bed on the wall and then dress the room to look like the wall was the floor with the bed on it because they couldn't get the spider to stick on the glass otherwise. This scene is remarkably effective, and Norman's score is great. And it's really cool when you look closely, you can see actual web coming out of the tarantula's spin heads, which I thought was always felt was a nice touch of realism, unintentional, of course. And the music ramps up when the spider hits the pillow and has the wonderful beats timed to the shoe smashes, which is wonderfully cheeky. In most movies it would be far too much, but it's done succinctly enough that Peter Hunt has fun lining those up, and it's a nice breather to the scene. We get a nice little reliever of tension where Bond goes into the bathroom, and there we have one of the major fade outs in the film, which is something Peter Hunt normally avoids, but it's something you needed there. Of course, passage of time, but you needed that to be able to immediately jump into this scene in Government House. Now, when Miss Taro comes in, again, the notion of her being of Chinese ancestry, obviously cueing you in that she is an operative of Dr. No and the files going missing. She's played by Zena Marshall, who was an acquaintance and friend of Terrence Young, and apparently she was cast at the last minute because he asked her because they couldn't get anybody else at the time. Again, going back to the idea that Dr. No was extraordinarily low budget, and again, that's part of the film's charm, that it's low budget and everybody's being as creative as possible to make every pound count. Here Bond gets the Geiger counter from Universal Export, and this being a very, very, very gadget-like item for 1962, because, who else had a Geiger counter at the time? The slightness of Bond going out the side door to catch Miss Taro listening at the keyhole, again, everything he does contributes to his character being the coolest son of a bitch you've ever seen in your life. This is all stuff in the screenplay, but built up and added to and emphasized by Terrence Young throughout the film. and it adds to Connery's mystique in the part. And again, it just wouldn't be the same if anybody else had directed. He has a slight smile on his face too. Again, there's even a charge in the male-female dialogue scenes in the young films that's not quite there in the others. As he goes off, he's smiling to himself because he knows she's one of the opposition, so he gets to have fun. Now we find about the samples being radioactive because the slight traces are left in the bottom of Quarrel's boat. Again, it's really revolutionary for, even this being 1962, the fact that Quarrel is an intelligent character who is involved in the action, even though he obviously is like, what the heck is a Geiger counter? I also love the bit where Conrad looks into the Geiger counter when he's given the dialogue. He's like, oh, they were radioactive, and he looks in there and gets a sort of, glint in his eye when he knows that, Dent has totally lied to him, so now he's got to get the truth out of him. And Quarrel has a nice reluctance. He takes his hat off. He doesn't want to go back to Crab Key because he's terrified of the local legends and the fact that, he feels he and Strangways barely got out of there in the first place. Again, this is all on location, and all of this location footage really adds to the You Are There feel and the fact that the whole film is a time capsule for 62 era Jamaica. Not to mention, it's a beautiful travelogue and advertisement for going to Jamaica, which is somewhere that, most people would never get the chance to go, especially not in 1962 England. And it gives you that escapism and that larger-than-life quality, even though the budget was certainly not larger than anything. Nice transition there. And here we get the really incredibly done bit where the telephone message, Bond calls Miss Taro, and she starts giving him directions to her apartment. And we transition to Bond driving the Sunbeam Alpine, but Miss Taro's voice is laid in as he's driving up to her house, and it's really wonderfully done. It moves very quickly. Also, it's a nice cutaway to her being in a state of semi-dress, already starts the notion of her being a very sensual creature and the tryst that is to come. So here she starts telling him, it's lovely up here in the mountains. She rolls around on the bed, and we push in, and now we start to transition. It's a slow fade out, and then her voice continues. It's a beautiful moment. We hold on her, though, just faintly, and then she starts to drift out. And then her last line, I'll be waiting for you, as he makes the turn off, is completely fatalistic and foreshadowing at its most extreme. Right there. Which sets up the, soon-to-be arrived Three Blind Mice in a hearse, no less. And Peter Hunt lays in the James Bond theme where Connery looks literally like the biggest badass on the planet. Obviously on a process screen. And this builds up to the first car chase of the series, which is extremely limited because it's just one stretch of road. But it's very fitting that, the Three Blind Mice are in a hearse. They're a black figure of death itself looming up. Connery's performance here is remarkable, especially for the fact that it's, 62 era, rear projection, a plate. And it works. He reacts so well, but the cutaways are to the same shot of the car steering around the same stretch of road, which is, very funny once you look at it, once you notice it, but it moves and the soundtrack is built up so much, and they laid in here when the car hits the bumper there. It's a great sound effect. Bond reacts, and it comes back and it hits it again because he's in a tiny little Sunbeam Alpine, and he's obviously having to get away from the big hearse. Now, this was the way to get rid of the hearse, and they had to slide the car under, and it barely got under on the real shot, but obviously they had to do a process one. And this is the real car going off. Terrence Young said he was almost killed because he was too busy looking at how great the shot was in the eyepiece of the camera, and somebody had to pull him back. And you'll see right here at the end of this, Peter Hunt leaves it. The car hits the camera, and Peter Hunt left it just long enough to get it right before it hits the camera on the tripod. Here we have the great flip line, which was invented for, to cap the scene off, and they had to get it just right. Terrence Young said that the guy they had there, who was literally the guy running the crane, he said it one way, and then they had to redub it a different way to make the payoff line work. The shot here of Bond walking up to Miss Taro's cottage is actually brilliantly reused by Peter Hunt to show Dent coming up, because he didn't have a shot of Dent coming in, so he flopped it. He flopped the negative and darkened it. Well, this is a great reveal moment, because she's totally shocked to see Bond, who she expected to be dead, and she's in a state, just coming out of the shower. She didn't expect him at all. And what's delicious about this whole sequence, you can see it in Connery's face, in his eyes, the smile on his face, the nonchalance, because he knows he's got her caught, and he grabs her by the towel on the neck and pulls her to him. He's like, I know your game. We know that. We're in on the joke. And what makes the scene even more fun is we watch her try and cover up, and we watch Bond, proceed through, sort of playing through the motions. And a lovely touch here, he smells her scent on the towel, ever so faintly. This is laid out here where she's talking, obviously, probably to Dent. It's not said who. It's like, yes, I know he's here. And then Bond comes through the door, and she immediately goes, I'll have to go now. And the way that Sean comes in here, he kicks the door back. It's like, oh, she's been found out. The way the towel is wrapped in his hands, like he's going to strangle her. You believe in living dangerously, I can see that. And she's kind of on edge. She's like, oh. Then he cuts it away. He cuts the tension with a joke, lets the towel go. It's a great little suspenseful moment. There are tons of little things like that all throughout the film. That is a Terrence Young thing. It's nobody else would probably do that. And again, the sensuality is raw here. You see there's no nudity, no anything, but it's so steamy that it's like it just hits you in the face. Look, no hands. They slowly go down, and we cut to the slowly revolving, almost phallic in a way, ceiling fan. And we cut back to obviously the post-coital state. Bond smoking, and he wants to go out, but she's determined to stay in, which is already setting up the notion that she's trying to keep him there so somebody can come and obviously eliminate him. So that just obviously confirms his earlier suspicions and allows him to prepare once he gets her out of there. Here he comes up with a nice line when she's like, why do you need a taxi? And he talks about, oh, the car wouldn't start, and that's why. Oh, that's why. She literally almost says, oh, that's why they didn't kill you, because you weren't in a car. Again, Connery's assurance here is just marvelous. And careful my nail varnish. The whole scene is capped. It's topped by the glance at the Rolex on the wrist. That is the grace note that makes that scene so impeccable. And that's another key line. She always leaves the lights on. That's what Bond leaves the lights on later for, the assassin coming in. Another nice reveal, pulling back to reveal the officer there. Be careful of a nail varnish. It's fun that she spits on him, which was, in the commentaries they talk about, it was hard to do because she didn't have any spit. And Bond kind of takes it, looks around, and goes back into the cottage. This scene is often overlooked because everybody talks about the confrontation with Professor Dent, but this is the important first half. This is one of the best scenes in the film and one of the best scenes in the entire franchise, where Bond goes around and literally sets the stage for the scene of the crime. He adjusts everything as if the two lovers had gone around. He pours drinks. He adjusts the pillows. He dims some of the lights. He, of course, sets the pillows in the bed to make it look as if they're still in bed, and so he can get the drop on whoever's coming there to kill him. But it's this set dressing, if you will. It shows Bond's intelligence. It shows his planning. It shows his cunning. It shows that he is not a man to be trifled with. He's not stupid, and he takes his job very seriously, but has a certain bemusement. And again, topped here by the fact that he turns the phonograph on, and of course it starts playing Underneath the Mango Tree, which is sort of the unofficial theme song of the film. And actually Harry Saltzman and Monty Norman were thinking about using that as the James Bond theme for quite some time, long before they ever came up with the James Bond theme, and John Barry coming in and doing his iconic work to create the theme that we know and love. So just think about that, the opening titles and the gun barrel having Underneath the Mango Tree over it. Now, again, everything else is pretty much dropped out in terms of silence. Bond pulls out a deck of cards because he's going to play solitaire and lie in wait to try and alleviate boredom. Interestingly here, that's not a Walther. He puts the silencer on. It's a great close-up, but it's not a Walther for some reason. Here's the shot of Connery walking up from before. Peter has had to take it, flop it, and darken it because he just didn't have a shot of Dent coming in. You hear the slight creak. Dent is fooled by the set dressing outside. Bond sits in the dark behind the door. We have the ominous shadow, and all we see is the hand holding the Smith & Wesson. And he fires 6 times, which sets up, the Smith & Wesson, you've had your 6. And obviously, he would have killed Miss Taro, too, because ostensibly they were both in bed. So it shows the ruthlessness and bloodthirstiness of even eliminating Dr. No's own operatives. Bond says he was already suspicious after he had first met Dent, so he was already on his trail. And Bond puts down his gun, so he already knows that, there are no bullets left in the gun. He lets Dent go through this whole thing of trying to edge it closer and string him along, Might do his work. And lights his cigarette. And he lets Dent hang himself, essentially. Lets him go through the whole thing, and he jumps down and picks up the gun and pulls the trigger, and then the look on Dent's face. He realizes he's empty. You've had your 6. This was the point that the censors balked at. Everywhere they had to go through a lot just to get it through. Bond shoots twice. Some people have said maybe he was originally supposed to shoot 6 times to make it you've had your 6 and to finish the joke. That probably would have been far too much tonally, but it's a brilliant scene. It underlines the coldness of Bond. Some people have always objected to that, but usually I find those people are the ones who aren't as familiar with Fleming's original novels or have ever read any of Fleming's books. And the reason why that's there and why it's so effective is it serves the purpose of reestablishing that darkness of Bond's world, which you get throughout the 3 Terrence Young films. That's always that ever-lurking danger. Bond is still human. He has almost some superhuman-like qualities, but he's still a mortal man, and danger is real. Even with the flippant humor and the cynicism of Bond, danger is real, and that invests the audience throughout. That was something Richard Maybaum adhered to and tried to inject throughout the rest of the film scripts that he wrote, and that would either be maintained or get diluted, but that was something he adhered to as well. What's important about the Bond films is the key creative team. Even if they didn't work on every single film, each one performed their roles so well that they were all vital to the success and the series' identity. And, without any of them, the series would not have the longevity and be the magic, iconic series that we know. Now, this, of course, is shot day for night, so that means using a lot of filters and stopping the camera and everything to try and simulate night. It gets timed differently on different releases, and a lot of times it doesn't look very good. Of course, it would look really great on the original dye transfer IB Technicolor prints from the original 1962 printing run and all the Premiere prints and stuff, but various video versions have not done it very well. So always keep that in mind in Day for Night. It always looks kind of dodgy. It just depends on how well the accuracy of the color timing is in the version you're watching. Of course, we're getting a nice buildup of music as we get our nighttime arrival on the beaches of Crab Key, and the nice torrents of water being pulled up on the soundtrack gives it a nice sense of you are there, a good realism to it. Again, the sound design in this film is very noticeable, and it's really not something you got in films of this era outside the big roadshow epics with that would be shown at roadshow 70 millimeter presentations with 6-track magnetic stereo. This is a low budget British film with mono optical audio, and the amount of attention paid to sound here in the first film is remarkable, and that's something that continued throughout the entire series. Of course, the film script does adhere pretty strictly to what Fleming laid down, but there are some nice diversions. This is the nice little comedic flourish with Quarrel being spooked and hitting the rum bottle, or jug, I should say. Another one of the fade-outs, again, to establish passage of time. We're already having Honey's voice filter in, humming underneath the mango tree, again, making that sort of the unofficial Bond theme of the film. Connery looks deliciously confused here. And this, of course, is the one time he sings in the series. He has a lovely voice, which, of course, was already pre-established in Darby O'Gill, The Little People. Here is the immortal entrance of Ursula Andress as Honey Rider in the iconic bikini, which is... I always love the way she shakes her hair. It's the nonchalance. It's the, she just comes out totally unexpected. And it was a vision, for 1962 audiences. Of course, people today, it doesn't have quite the same impact. Of course, Fleming's novels, Honey is completely naked, and you obviously couldn't do that. But again, that raw sensuality is there, even though she's in a bikini. My favorite part is, of course, she's still got the giant knife strapped on, and the way she handles herself. She's supposed to be the sort of nature girl or female Tarzan, and that is there, and that helps her be just this sort of endearing character. And so throughout the rest of the film, Bond sort of has, not quite paternal, but he has a very protective vibe, but then she does hold her own, and she is able to hide Bond and Quarrel from Dr. No's guards. And of course, she is very suspicious of this strange Englishman who just turns up. Ironically, this was shot on, as was most of the film, not far from Ian Fleming's GoldenEye, which was the his summer house where he wrote all the Bond novels. Pretty much in a once a year, he would go down there for the year and come back with a completed novel. Originally, the producers wanted to do Thunderball first, but of course that was held up in court over the rights with Kevin McClory and Jack Whittingham. So they had to choose a different novel and chose Dr. No, which was great because it really allowed them to stretch their budget much further. They didn't get to do all of the extra stuff like the torture maze of Dr. No at the end of the novel, but they also had to streamline things, which helped to build it into a film narrative. So it was a genius move to choose Dr. No to go for the first film, but later on they just kept doing that, and they would choose novels at random, and they didn't follow the loose continuity that Fleming had established, which is sort of a shame, but that's just how all this got started. Gustavo Quarrel is suddenly like, wait, what? Who is this girl? And Ursula's kind of stumbling there because right before they shot this, she had fallen and injured herself, so they had to cover up the gash with makeup. So that's why she kind of looks a little hesitant on her feet. I love how Bond does kick the sand to try and hide the footprints, but, it's sort of a last-ditch attempt in vain because, they're going to be spotted anyway. And, they really go under here, and they have the little charges buried to simulate the machine gun hits, so... obviously not. They really went and did this. So it's a remarkably effective scene. I always love the megaphone effect on the head guy's voice. And again, when the machine gun kicks up the staccato, pulsating bullet hits on the soundtrack, they burn themselves into your brain. And Bond telling Honey, they're bluffing. He's already trying to calm her nerves and managing to make it past another layer of Dr. No's protection that obviously would have unnerved or already killed anybody else, because it's already succeeded against everybody else right up to Strangways. One of my favorite little gaffes here, when he turns away and he says full speed ahead, it still has the megaphone effect on it, even though he doesn't have the megaphone in front of his face. That's one of those little things that always sticks with you that I love. And I love the random crab crawling up in front of Quarrel. Bond, of course, waits until they're out of the line of sight to try to get up. Now, the mention of the dragon again, which is, the big swamp tank of sorts from Fleming's novel that serves a pretty big role, but they do a lot less with in the film because what they had didn't turn out very well, and that's why it's not seen very much, because it couldn't really move over the marsh, and it was just very unimpressive. So they had to do a lot of cutaways and work around that. Honey has her great monologue about the darkness of nature. Shows her grit and experience. Of course, Ursula was revoiced by Nikki van der Zyl, who did a lot of a number of the female voices in the early films. A number of the actors and actresses in the early Bonds were dubbed, and so impeccably well, you don't really notice it at all. The Fetch My Shoes line is something that a lot of people have started pointing to in the past few years as a sort of put down to Quarrel, as a sort of master-servant thing. I don't think it was ever intended that way. I'll admit I never noticed it until people started bringing it up. I guess if you want to read it that way, you can, but I don't think that was intended whatsoever. And now Honey's going to show her worth by getting them out of range and taking them to her hiding place. So, she's not just the useless damsel, even though she's obviously in over her head and dealing with, Dr. No himself. And here we have the nice bit of business about, it feeling lived in, because Bond's complaining about the mosquitoes and they're covered in water. And she starts rubbing the water all over him. So it's a nice little bit of business along with the nice design of the soundtrack, to literally make you feel more visibly there. And of course, if you look on Connery's arm in all the early Bonds, you see this splotch of makeup that's to cover up his tattoo, which read Scotland Forever. Now, this bit of business is a classic element of older films, the cutting the reeds to breathe underwater to hide from guards. I don't know where exactly it first appeared. I know one of the earliest instances I've ever seen it was in I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, the classic masterpiece from 1932. So I don't know if that's where it originated, but I'm sure it probably was even before that. But it's a nice classical bit of adventure business. And this is a nice built-up sequence. The score and the editing is built up to where it seems almost as if the dogs are getting right up on them. They're on the scent, and they're going to be discovered, and that's game over. And it's built all the way up until this huge crash of the birds flying off, and it's enormous on the soundtrack. Almost makes you jump a little bit. It's a beautiful rhythm established and built to the very last moment. And then the music trails off and gets very low, and then Bond slowly breaks the surface of the water and his hair streams back. but it's still there. So what you think is a nice breather sets up the fact that the other man is coming down. So there's the guy pulling up, holding up the rear, coming around. So it gives you a slight breather, but the suspense is still there, and then ramps back up. But the music is a lot quieter now, which honestly increases the suspense. This is another great moment where Bond shows off not only his talents, but the darkness and exercising the license to kill. This doesn't get brought up like the scene with Professor Dent, but it is another cold-blooded killing, but it is, again, a matter of the enemy or Bond, his life or theirs. The way he grabs him across the face, bends him back before stabbing. And we cut away to Honey's reaction, which again underlines her generally good-hearted nature with, "Why? Because I had to." And Quarrel shows his intelligence by, talking about, man, that was a really interesting move, letting the others go past and swinging back around. So the fence here and everything, not only is it warning and trying to keep would-be visitors out, but I think it also sets up, that's essentially the point at which you cross over into potentially being contaminated by the radiation generated by Dr. No's activities. There's no radiation sign, but that's another thing I've also assumed. It's like the point of no return. So those are the wheel tracks of the marsh buggy, a.k.a. Dragon. Which you can see in Bond's face, he doesn't, it doesn't faze him at all because he knows exactly, as he says later, this is a dragon that runs on diesel engines. And the line about "we'll be out of here by midnight" sets up, it's like they're on a military excursion. They take this moment to rest because it's a secret assault. Now, this is a great little scene where Honey talks about her backstory and shows off her character's strength because in her backstory, she talks about she believes Dr. No killed her father. She talks about how she was educated by their encyclopedia and they went all around the world while her father studied marine life. And that's why she found herself grounded in Jamaica. That's why she is interested in wildlife and seashells. And then she talks about, in a really surprising bit that made it into the film, part of the novel where she was raped by a man in Kingston, the landlord of where they had been staying, and then exacted her revenge by killing him with a black widow spider. It's a really, really strong moment that usually just sort of flies by and people forget about, but it shows her character's strength. It shows that she's not a damsel in distress. She does have grit, and is really surprising for a film of 1962. It's something you do see, and even in the early Bond films, everybody thinks of Bond women as being the eye candy, or being damsels in distress, or just being there as window dressing, which, that does happen sometimes, but there is a certain factor, I think, especially in the early films, that the female characters do have a sort of emancipation, especially from the traditional roles that most actresses were still having to do of either being the housewife or the working girl or the young girl with a heart of gold. It is something different. They have a new, exciting freshness on the screen that you didn't really have before this point. And also in their sexuality, because the way that Honey does her hair there, when she asks the question, do you have a woman of your own? And then Bond tries to think of an answer before being called away. It's a nice little flourish there. That scene is the most you get about Honey's character in the film, and it's admittedly very small, but, she is a participant in events on screen. She's not just there for window dressing. She has a role to play and does play it, even though she is mostly an innocent in the terms of the story. This is a nice little tension-building moment. We're getting progressively darker, and this scene here with the dragon tank, we're getting back into more of sort of the day-for-night territory, and it also shows the passage of time. They also darkened this. You see the dragon tank there. It was very ineffective. It turned out not very well and got stuck everywhere, so that's why this scene is photographed the way that it is. We see the little bit of flame, and it's off in the distance. But it is really effective. If you didn't know about the troubles they had in making the thing move and work properly, you wouldn't even think about that, because it does really work. It's obviously something cooked up by Dr. No to scare off locals, so it doesn't need to pass up to scrutiny, when seen up close. This has a nice Last Stand sort of feel, where they're going up against this with just their pistols. We have the nice sound difference between the guns, showing the difference in the firing. Also, there are some of the shots there. Bond doesn't have a PPK again. It's one of the times you see, which happens throughout the series, where the guns change randomly. I manages to knock out one of the headlights. And Quarrel's death here is one of the grisly deaths in the series, being burned alive, and it's built up, it comes closer, the flames come closer, and then finally when the flames shoot out, his eyes bulge out, and his scream, again, one of those things that just sort of sears itself into your memory, and it's a great, memorable, grisly death scene. And Quarrel becomes the first sacrificial lamb of the series, which is a key part of the Bond formula. There has to be a sacrificial lamb to give the plot a personal sort of motivation for Bond to continue. And this is something that's in the original Fleming text as well, but it really gets honed out in the film series as one of the key essential elements. I do love that they stop Bond by firing the bullet into the dirt. It's a nice, it's like, yeah, we'll still kill you. And they also appear in the radiation suits. Then you can't really see their faces, so that's another weird, off-putting moment for the audience. I've also loved the cut-off scream sound effect every time every time I see the film. It's one of the many little sound effects that have always stuck out to me in the early Bonds. So now they'll be brought to Dr. No's fortress inside the Dragon tank. Again, we're still following the plot of the novel. The film doesn't really deviate heavily in terms of the structure. This is the point where we cross over into the elements of the more fantastic. It still remains grounded, but as soon as we cross through this door, we are inside Dr. No's world entirely. And this is set up even further by the whole trek through the island jungle that we've just gone through. We've gone through pure nature, and now we're into the world of the fantastic. This is the iconic shower room decontamination chamber. Again, Ken Adams' design work here on such a low budget is just, I don't know how anybody could ever come up with this and then execute it on, a very small budget. So this is done to remove any trace of radiation from Honey and Bond that they may have picked up, and that's why they're read with a Geiger counter. Their clothes are actually burned, and it's, again, like they're being stripped of the outside world, even down to their clothes, before they are allowed to pass through into the strange world of Dr. No. And Bond is even making orders. And, it's like, you got to take these handcuffs off. He's giving orders even though he's a captive. He's an active participant. He's not passive, which is something that certain critics have talked about, his more passive role in Goldfinger, because for most of the narrative, he's a prisoner of Goldfinger. But you can see here they did make great pains to make Bond active always, to give him that self-assurance, which is a key part of the Bond character. And something that is, right out of the Fleming text. Of course, that bit there, I know many people have always paused to try and see if Ursula was actually nude there, but she was in a sort of moleskin outfit, which you see in some of the production stills that were taken when this sequence was shot. So now, of course, they're cleared of their radioactive charge, or at least Honey is. Bond still has a count of 4. And then they check under his fingernails to find it's just a trace amount. And here again, passing through into the world of Dr. No, here we pass through into this sort of rock chamber, and they're sealed in with these vault doors before it opens on the other side. This also gives you the notion that we're passing through and we're starting to go underground, which is, revealed later once they go down levels and Dr. No's actual fortress room is well beneath the sea with the aquarium window. Now, when the door opens here, we are fully in Dr. No land. And we get the absolutely bizarre realism-breaking moment of being greeted by, the greatest hotel service with the absolutely beyond complimentary attendants. Bond here is given a choice of cigarettes and chooses Turkish, which fits more of his preferred smoking style, which we get reams about in the Fleming novels. And Bond just sort of takes to this, He's obviously a bit perplexed at first. Honey is totally, in over her head right here, which is why she just plods along, looking around with big eyes. Bond starts to play along, though, and plays along with the charade because he knows he has to play through the game being set up by Dr. No until he can find out what exactly is going on and get to the end of the maze, as it were. So this does kind of go into the notion that's in the novel about Dr. No having a maze of human endurance, and anyone who is captured by him is observed like lab rats in a maze. And here they're given creature comforts, but they're kept under lock and key like human guinea pigs, as it were. And this is a great crack here. 2 tickets to London. She just freezes with a smile. Here we have the first appearance of the prison-like doors that only open on the outside, something that pops up in many Bond films, especially later in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Bond goes around and decides to eat and put on an air because, he knows Dr. No is watching their every move. Tries to reassure Honey and encourage her to keep up this facade. It is interesting. I don't know why Dr. No immediately drugs them. I guess it's so he can observe, because the very next scene, it is necessary for Bond and Honey to be asleep. It's also a method of control. But it's like, why would he go through all this elaborate setup of giving them this elaborate suite, but then immediately knock them out with the drugged coffee? It also shows that Bond is human because he is able to be drugged, which is something that happens very rarely in the series, and is a nice humanizing moment that does show, some of the dangers of the trade. Now, the sound design comes back here with a real vengeance. The coffee saucer being louder and Honey starting to feel the effects of the drug cues in the audience, cues in Bond. He knows something is going on. He goes, "Damn coffee." And he throws it, and it's so loud because they punch up the sound level so much. And then when he pushes the cart, it's like a bomb has gone off. I've always loved the way that the first thing to pass through the table is Bond's hair. So it's like an arrow pointing downward, and he's just down for the count. Now here is the great moment of suspense where we actually see Dr. No for the first time. A spectral, death-like figure coming into the room. We see his shadow. We only see his figure. And we were introduced to Dr. No just in the way we were introduced to Bond at the very beginning of the film, building his character in the exact same way, but adding that crucial delay, giving the audience just a glimpse. And then here, for the first time, we see the metallic hands pull back the sheet, and the other hand comes down to give the camera a full view of this strange figure that has these strange replacement hands. And he's just staring at Bond, observing the face of the man that's caused him so much trouble that he's started to almost admire in a certain way. This is a nice central moment where Honey is obviously naked, and she goes to the closet, turns around. It's a very tantalizing moment. It's very much again again not sexual but sensual thing, and that's again a flourish that I only think are in the Terrence Young films. And Bond is now making the best of it. They've been drugged, and he's put on clothes. And, of course, all of the clothes are Chinese in origin, so everything is still under Dr. No's, not just his control, but even his own personal preferences. So Honey is dressed in a certain style. Bond is dressed in the same manner as Dr. No is. I've always loved the way that the Brown works here, but Bond has still folded his handkerchief in his own straight lace style. So it's sort of a middle finger at Doctor No that, yeah, okay, I'm playing your game, I'm wearing your clothes, but I'm still myself. So now we're being drawn further into the fortress by going onto the elevator and going down. But it's, again, going back to the idea that Dr. No's fortress goes way far underground, even though, obviously the sets did not. These were all separate sets. This is a great little scene where, Honey is very scared, and, Bond talks about, of course I'm scared too, so naturally leave all the talking to me. It's really one of the great iconic images. She clenches her hand around, around Bond's shirt there. Now, coming into Dr. No's sanctuary, the first thing we have is the chimes. It goes back to the opening gun barrel and then adds a sort of mystical air to it. We have the first view of this sort of strange blending of high technology and nature, because it's literally carved out of like the bedrock of deep under the island. Also, throughout all of the scenes in the second half of the film, everything, once we get into Dr. No's fortress, there's a undercurrent of this sort of machine-like noise in the soundtrack. And really, it's to suggest the notion, I think, of atomic power, because everything is run on atomic power. And it gives a certain aural significance to the Dr. No's fortress sequences. This is the rear projection that was used for the aquarium here, but all they could find was this tiny amount of footage of giant fish, which is why they worked in the line about the glass being magnifying, and then Bond responds with minnows pretending they're whales. The first interest of Dr. No here has such potency because everything is built up to this moment and given Dr. No himself such a power over Bond. This is the character the figure that's been manipulating every event of the film up to this point. Joseph Wiseman does an absolutely astonishing job. The way he's stiff, he has very little movement. His face, his eyes don't have emotion in them except for the smallest glimpses. They did give him a makeup of sorts, an eye makeup, to again suggest the Asian features. That's again something that a lot of critics like to point out, the casting against ethnicity. Dr. No is a character of mixed ancestry, and in the novel he's had plastic surgery, he's done all these different things, but he's his own complete strange individual that I don't think that the actor having makeup is really a problem at all. This is the stolen Goya painting of the Duke of Wellington that was put in as an in-joke at the last minute, and of course it had been recently stolen and was a huge news item in 1962. Dr. No gives his backstory here in front of the rear projection that drove Peter Hunt crazy in trying to get working right. This being the first of the Bond villain confrontations, what later became known as the talking killer syndrome that Roger Ebert liked to write about. And while Goldfinger has the laser table scene, which is the most talked about, the most quoted, for my money, this is actually the best one of the series. I know it's the first one, but it has such a charge, and it has such a suspense level built in because the whole film has built up to this point. And the interplay between Bond and Dr. No is so on point that, again, it's a tennis match. We are like honey. We're looking back and forth at these two individuals. Bond is continually trying to pry, trying to provoke Dr. No, which Dr. No recognizes and matches. He talks about it being a bluff, that Bond only requested a Geiger counter, and he knows Bond's game. And it's this constant playing back and forth that gives this whole sequence a charge and keeps it from ever being boring for a single instant. So even though, obviously, Dr. No is not in the film for really much of its runtime, he's actually in very little of it. It's very much like the unseen Blofeld that we get later in From Russia with Love and Thunderball. It is the idea of less is more, and the whole building up to the reveal of Dr. No, again, sets the stage for the next film in From Russia with Love, the whole film building to the Orient Express confrontation. Again, Joseph Weissman's performance, it's just marvelous. You just find yourself looking at it. His mixture of stillness and the intelligence behind the eyes that is contained. And here's a great touch where they throw readers of the novel off, because in the novel, Bond steals the table knife and various things to be able to survive the torture maze later. But here, that's thrown out because Dr. No is shown to be so intelligent that he knows that that was a whole ploy and tells Bond to put the knife back. So already we're like, oh, if you've read the novel, how will Bond get out of this? He doesn't have the knife. He doesn't get the table lighter. He doesn't get the bit of copper wire later on to turn into sort of a spear. So that's a nice flourish. There again is Milton Reed, who you can see in full, who you only saw his side earlier in the film. This is also one of the best Bond moments in the series, I think. The way that Connery carries himself, the absolute effortlessness at not showing his fear and not showing his own anxieties, at being cavalier and cynical and ever the detective. It may very well be the coolest representation of Bond on screen. And in a lot of ways, it is like the introduction in the Casino. Again, there is a nice sort of feeling of repetition that Bond is always cool under pressure, whether it be high-stakes gambling or, talking with megalomaniacs. And in doing all this, it does manage to maintain the otherworldliness of the same sequence in Fleming's novel. Although the film can't go to the elaborate lengths of the novel, and Dr. No doesn't have pincers for hands. But the metal hands here are just as effective. The great shot here where he crushes the Buddha, and that, again, the great sound design. Norman Wanstall's effects are just so... they underline the events on screen so much so that they stick in your mind. And the line about Dr. No's pride being, hurt by Bond, that made him curious, almost as in the manner of being a scientist about what sort of a man that Bond is. That's why he allows him to come in. But, of course, he misjudged him. We also get to see, Bond's, living of the high life. Of course, the line about, the Dom Perignon 53 and Bond preferring the 52. So even in the comebacks, he uses his knowledge and his enjoyment of the finer things in life. Uses that to throw back at Dr. No, who obviously does the same. And here Bond is beaten. He is roughed up. So again, in the Terence Young films, Bond is still human. He just had that entire scene about being cool under fire, and now he's just, gotten beat up pretty severely. So now we cut to the prison chamber. This, of course, is the point of the novel where Bond would break through the grate and go in and be goaded, essentially, into Dr. No's torture maze with the various devices and creatures, large and small, to destroy him. And he manages to survive while being observed the whole time by scientists with, notepads. Of course, they couldn't do this in the film. They didn't have the budget for it, and it probably would have, not... I don't even know how they would have tried to attempt it. But you get the bare minimum of that here with the electrified gate at first, which in the novel... Bond has to think about, is it going to shock me again? Or, am I supposed to go on or just sit here? So that's why this happens here in this scene. But you see him, pull his shoe off to try and ground against being shocked again. So that's another action that shows Bond's intelligence and tenacity, which, again, is so crucial to him being a screen icon. So he crawls into the tunnels, which is what we get in the novel with the maze. He's actually crawling through tunnels and comes across, actually does come across a nest of tarantulas. So again, that may be where they got the idea to switch the centipede to a tarantula, which is, of course, much more manageable than a centipede. The usage of sound echoing through here gives it an otherworldly aspect and vibe. I've always loved this shot here, this extreme close-up of Connery's face looking down. It's a remarkable close-up there. I've always loved all the fine detail you see in his face right up there close. Of course, they didn't really have much more than a short stretch of pipeline, so they had to just keep reusing it over and over and over. This is the one time you see a stuntman really in the film. In the cutaway here, it's obviously not Connery, but of course this was a pretty significant little drop. And of course, on original print, with the difference in darkness and projected brightness, you wouldn't have really seen that in the first place. It's only on the home video versions where you can really see up close and stop and rewind, where that's more obvious. So crawling through, we obviously don't get the giant squid fight at the end, which would have been far beyond the limitations of the budget. But we do get the burning of the heat of the pipes. So again, Bond's ingenuity is to take his tattered clothes, rip them off, and make ersatz gloves of sorts, which again we'll see again pop up again in On Her Majesty's Secret Service when Bond has to create gloves to break out of the cable car wheelhouse. And now with the beautiful sound coming up and then the reflection there on his face, we get the rushing water. And a lot of people have wondered why the tunnel is just suddenly flooded. I myself tried to figure it out a lot as a kid, watching the film over and over. It's obviously could be simply just a way to torture Bond again or to, mess with him more. I kind of almost wonder if it's some way to keep the radioactivity level from being super high. Maybe that's why there's all this hot water and running through these heated pipes or something. But again, it's never explained. I've always loved the intensive steam that happens after the water passes through. But of course, Bond gets to the vent right up here. And so I guess you have to think, because he kind of turns off, the water must have gone straight, because otherwise the water would have just shot out into the decontamination room every 20 minutes when it cycled through. But again, I think you're just not supposed to think about these things. And some of those old things you wind up thinking about over and over and over again when you've seen the film 1,000 times. So now Bond will escape and be able to make it into Dr. No's control room, where he will then obviously try and stop Dr. No's nefarious plan to topple the next American space launch. And it's also great that we come back out into the decontamination chamber that we were at before, so we get a bit of spatial geography, and Bond is having to figure his way around, and everybody's gone. And now the, again, ill-fated, not long for this world Chang comes out, and Bond will eliminate him in a really nice, brutal fashion. He strangles him with one arm and then slowly sinks down. And if you look, Peter Hunt chooses to fade in the peephole of the door right as Sean's head comes down. So when we transition over, you see Sean's head, and then it matches right to where his head is in the radioactivity suit. So it's a nice bit of visual matching. We get our first glimpse of the astonishing Dr. No set that Ken Adam designed. This was really the showpiece that wowed Stanley Kubrick so much that he hired Ken Adam to do Dr. Strangelove, which is then why Ken Adam didn't do From Russia with Love. And Sid Cain, who was working under Adam on the Dr. No, did the design on From Russia with Love, and why that film has a much more realistic vibe throughout, which is also very valid, but it's not the iconic Ken Adam style that is so associated with Bond. And this set is the set piece of the film, no doubt about it. It is still a marvel. It's one of the great sets in film history. And again, the notion of sound design comes back in, all of the strange computer noises, and combined with the noise of the atomic reactor, becomes so iconic that always you associate it with this film, with this scene in particular. And of course, we're learning all this stuff with Bond. So Bond is our focal point, and so we are with him because all of this is new to us as well. We're able to piece together what Bond will have to do, where the controls are, how can he get to the gantry. Yes, he's in disguise, but he also can't slip up, which he does right here, where Chang is obviously not in the right place. And thank goodness that these masks only have a slight see-through hole, because otherwise, if he had the Dr. No style clear mask on, he couldn't have made it into the first place, because they would have seen it was Bond. And it's also interesting that, again, the editing here allows the pace of the cutting to be not quite slowed down, but it allows shots to play out, which builds up the tension because Bond can't put a foot in the wrong place. We're getting closer to the launching point. The countdown has already begun. We're just a few minutes away from the rocket liftoff. So Bond has come in at the point of essentially the test runs. Now they're bringing the reactor back down. So now he knows how to activate and deactivate the reactor. So he has his entry point into how to stop Dr. No. He's made it onto the gantry, but now he's got to stand there and wait. And so again, that tension just continues to ratchet up further and further and further, even though we're all guessing in the same position that Bond is. And again, that tension is just built further and further and further. And it's also cool seeing these films nowadays. You get that sort of throwback vibe because we are seeing high-tech equipment from obviously 1962. But, instead of dating the film, for the early Bond films, it helps make them their own thing. It doesn't date them as being 1960s because the energy of the films have never dissipated. And again, you cannot say enough about the editing style that Peter Hunt developed here on Dr. No with Terrence Young. It is a method of using jump cuts and cutting on rhythm and not showing, full editing geography that had been, the traditional Hollywood style. Here, obviously, we go back to model work. We have the radio beam coming out of the bauxite mine and obviously a small little model boat there. So again, now on the screen behind Dr. No, the countdown is on the screen. The beam is in position. We're getting all the way up to the moment of truth. But again, getting back to the editing style established here, in a lot of ways, I think it's even more revolutionary than what Godard did on Breathless in 1959, which, as much as that film is a masterpiece, it's just that this film, Dr. No, is just astonishingly well put together, and Peter Hunt continued and improved on this and throughout the Bond films of the 60s. Again, back to the sound design, as Bond goes up to the danger level, the pitch increases and increases further and further and further, like it's going to boil over. And then as soon as Bond punches the guy out the gantry, the music cuts in. Dr. No jumps up, starts shouting, and now the warning sirens are going to start going off because we've gone past the point of no return. Everybody runs out, which again lets you know that everything's really about to go boom. And now the final battle on the gantry, where Dr. No has the advantage of having the amazing steel hands. It's like, not somebody you could easily defend yourself against, but there's also the little platform going down into the boiling water and the steam rising, the music rising up. And Dr. No gets his comeuppance by his own scientific insight. He created these great steel hands, but they can't save him. And that amazing moment where the hands slip down and scrape against the metal, again, the sound design coming up there. It's one of those moments that just sears itself into your brain. And Bond has to stagger out, exhausted, and try and make it out before everything hits critical mass and explodes. What's interesting here, Bond makes it out, but we hold inside the control room. We see the rocket proceeding, so we know it's made it through. It's going to make its trajectory. but we hold inside the control room with everything about to explode and everything empty, and this really intricate long shot here on the floor. And on the soundtrack, we hear "Go, go, go," and immediately cut to Bond trying to escape, but get Honey before, rescue Honey before making his way out. I love that he's still wearing the bloody undershirt. He can't find her, and he goes into the room where they were, which, of course, if the door had shut, then, we wouldn't have had a happy ending. And of course, when they go to Honey, she's tied up, about to be drowned, and they did try to do the crabs from the novel, but they just didn't. It didn't work out. And this is the best music editing in the film, when it's timed to Sean's punch hitting the guy. So in the novel, Honey was tied up naked on a beach, and Dr. No was going to have her eaten by land crabs, which she's able to survive with her nature knowledge. But the crabs they got didn't work and actually arrived frozen, so they just kind of sat there. So they just kept the set and just kept it as if she was going to drown. Now here they use the real location and pump in all this smoke and have everybody run around. These were some pickup shots and really add to the effectiveness because, of course, the model is what blows up. But this builds to the tension. You have the sirens to go off in the background. And, again, everything's going to explode. And here Bond and Honey manage to find the boat to escape in and, obviously steal it away. It's again keeping the tension up because they haven't escaped everything yet, and we know just from the panic of all the extras and the sirens continuing that things are about to literally explode in their face. And when the model explodes, it is literally one of the most effective model explosions I think in cinema history. This right here, the way the smoke obscures the screen, even though it's obviously a tiny model. It's honestly, I think it may be the best explosion in the series. It's so well done, and then cut at just the right moment. You don't even realize it's a model. And then we cut from that to the quiet of the boat that has run out of fuel. And now we have the what do we do now? And even after all this, bloodied up and beaten and everything, Bond's nonchalance is still there. And we have the first of the iconic final clinch end reel on water endings. Monty Norman builds up this sort of march military little bit of music here where Felix Leiter has shown up with the Marines. Terrence Young said that they cooked this up, as their ending because they really didn't have anything. It has a bemused quality to it that is just endearing, even though obviously the music is a little bit, okay, this is strange, but then immediately segues into this absolutely stellar, beautiful rendering of Underneath the Mango Tree, which is at once magical, humorous, and the way that Honey just is endearingly looking at Bond and slides down, and then Felix turns around with that sort of shake of the head. And then this here, the grace note of letting the rope slide out, letting the fingers go up, and staying abandoned to have a tryst with Honey out in the waves with Underneath the Mango Tree. And we get the end title card. This became the signature Bond ending, and in many ways is still the best ending of any film in the series. It's at once iconic, endearing, gives you a good note to go out on, and here we have the Bond theme come back for the end credits with the still image of Bond and the bloody gun barrel. I've always thought it was interesting how the Bond theme trails out there and with a sort of warble, but that ends Dr. No. And I feel like I didn't even get to half the stuff I wanted to cover. I hope this has been an informative track. I've just been sort of, running at the mouth and trying to get across all the various things that pop through my head whenever watching the film and, talk about some of the factoids and trivia and some of the production and things, but I'm not even scratching the surface. I could talk about this film or any of the Bond films or Bond in general for hours or days on end, and there's so much to discover. I really think that the Bond films should be respected as art, and they never have been. And the fan community does go into great detail with other fans, but that's about all there is. There's still very little recognition of the importance of the Bond series in the world of criticism and the academic world. And I think there's no better place to start looking at the Bond films more seriously and with critical perspective than starting with the original film, starting with Dr. No, where everything began, and researching into the production history and how literally with a very tiny, small budget, they made the little film that could. Dr. No was a film that no one expected to do well. No one really had much faith in outside of the production crew and the producers of Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman. And, it was thought that it would be somewhat successful, they hoped, and might start a series of perhaps 2, maybe 3 films. Because even at that time, the 60s film series were not a regular occurrence. And so, even Terrence Young thought, 3 films would be at best if they were lucky. And again, Dr. No is the little film that could. It is an absolute masterpiece. It is one of the greatest films ever made. And for just over 1 million, they made just under 2 hours of absolute magic and managed to transpose the golden typewriter of Ian Fleming's prose and capture that inimitable voice that Fleming had on the page and bring it to full, vivid, fleshed out, fully realized life on the cinema screen. So with that being said, I hope you've enjoyed this commentary. I dedicate this to not only Bond fans everywhere, but the key creative team and cast and crew of the entire Bond series, but the key cast and crew members, their importance, not just to the Bond films, but the entire cinematic landscape and our pop culture. It can never be underestimated, and it can never be talked about or praised highly enough. So with that being said, this has been my commentary on Dr. No, and humbly yours, I am the motion picture analyst.